morning. I think we're going to go ahead and get started with our last presentation of the morning. This presentation is 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease. And again, I'm Laura Brown, if you haven't been here for the two previous sessions in the auditorium, and I'm with the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability, and it's my honor to introduce Angela Jones, the Executive Director of Alzheimer's Association, East Tennessee Chapter. Ms. Jones has worked in the nonprofit world since 1988, when she graduated from the University of Tennessee with a degree in public relations. She has spent her career working with children, the homeless population, inner city families, and for the last 2 years with the Alzheimer's Association. She became particularly interested in Alzheimer's after a traumatic brain injury in 2008 increased her risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. She lives in Knoxville with her husband, their 2 cats, and a new puppy. Let's welcome Miss Angela Jones.
It's not like I was trying to make a grand entrance. I just have trouble with steps, so I realized it's like I was behind the curtain. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. So I don't have a PowerPoint. This topic is one that usually gets lots of questions, and I tend to get off script if I try a PowerPoint. So I didn't bring one. I did bring some materials that are up here. If you want to come get some afterwards, there's a pamphlet that's the basics of Alzheimer's disease, and then I have some bookmarks that are the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. We're just going to talk about the warning signs. Please stop me with questions, and then we'll talk about risk factors and how you can decrease those risk factors. As she told you in the introduction, I had a brain injury in 2008. I was riding an ATV without a helmet and wrecked and popped my head on some rocks. I was knocked out for a while. The ATV went up in the air and came down on my hip, hence my trouble with steps. I have pins in my hip, and I spent the better part of 2008 relearning a lot of things. I had to relearn speech, relearn fine motor skills, relearn walking because of my hip. And after that, at the end of my year, my neurologist or neurosurgeon said, now the things that are going to forever be different in your life, and we talked about those, and one of those is that I'm at a greater risk for Alzheimer's. So that's why it became really important to me to work on finding a cure and treatment. And that is part of one of the primary missions of the Alzheimer's Association. So I work for the National Alzheimer's Association. We have different chapters across the country. We have about 85 chapters, and I'm in the East Tennessee chapter. And we help people locally. We provide information. We do free educational programs. We consult about care and what you may need. We have support groups, any number of things that can help folks locally. But part of what we also do is work toward finding a cure and treatment, because if we can figure that out, that changes everything locally for all of us. This past week in Washington, D.C. was our Alzheimer's Association International Conference. It's an annual event where the researchers on Alzheimer's from across the country, across the world, come together to talk about their latest findings in research. So some of the information I'll be giving you is literally hot off the presses this week, and I've got it written down because I don't want to get it wrong, and this is an important topic and I never want to get it wrong, but we'll get into those. So how many folks in here know someone with Alzheimer's? Just raise your hands. Okay, which is probably pretty typical in a crowd. It is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. It is the only cause of death in the top 10, which there is no cure or treatment for. So that's why it's incredibly important that we continue to research this and find out more information. Some of the things we do know is as I said, we were going to talk about the 10 warning signs. So I'm just going to talk about what these warning signs are, because a lot of questions we get are, how is Alzheimer's different from normal aging? Because that's a really tricky one to know. Excuse me, I'm taking off my watch so I can be mindful of time. That's a really tricky one to know. Is this normal? Is this Alzheimer's? What am I looking at? So the first warning sign we talk about, and again, these are on the bookmarks that I have up here, is memory loss that disrupts your daily life. So folks would say, well, I forgot where I parked my car. My dad forgot where he parked the car. Is that Alzheimer's? Does it disrupt his daily life? Because I've got to tell you, I forget where I park my car sometimes. I have been known to park at an airport and come out convinced I'm parked on level 3, and lo and behold, I'm on level 4, and only after about 20 minutes did I figure that out. It's like, oh yeah. So that was a once in a, and then of course I go back to, is it my brain injuries and all that? No, we all forget where we park. That's fine. The problem is, if someone had told me, no, you parked on level 4, remember you told me that because blah, 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 and I was like, no, If I don't believe you when you give me the answer, if it's just still foreign to me, that's a problem. Even a high school student forgets an algebraic equation, something they study. They may be in algebra class every day, but when it's test time, they forget it, or they'd all make 100 all the time. So we all have that degree of forgetting something, but does it disrupt your daily life? Does it happen often enough that there is a problem in your daily life? Do you lose your keys often enough that you have no idea where they are every single day? Daily life interruptions is the key there. The second thing you would look for as a warning sign is challenges in planning or solving problems. So this might be something like, I give you a map, or give you, not even a map, I'll write down the directions how to get somewhere. Go to this street, turn left, go to this street, turn right, and you still have problem following that. Or if someone has problems following multiple instructions, if I don't write it down because it's only 3 turns, and so go out here to the traffic light, turn left, go 4 blocks, turn right, and then it will be half a mile down on your left. If somebody gave me those directions, I'd have to repeat them back to get them right. And I have no idea where I just took you because I'm not from here. But I'd have to repeat them back to get them right. But if someone has difficulty remembering multiple steps to something, then that's a challenge in planning or solving a problem, how to get somewhere. Next one is difficulty completing familiar tasks. Now, this is one that a lot of folks will see, particularly around holidays, when they go home to visit family, and they'll see that mom, who used to make the turkey and dressing always this way, it just was off. Something's off. And when I asked her about it, she said she had trouble cooking it. It was a new recipe or something. If it's something you've accustomed to doing all the time, the accountant who balances his checkbook every month suddenly can't do that. That's difficulty completing a familiar task. Cooking a meal you've done over and over and over, and you suddenly can't remember the recipe, that's difficulty completing a familiar task. Part of the problem is we all cover for ourselves. And if we have spouses, then we look to them to help us cover. So if I were to forget a recipe that I've made over and over and over, and someone to come over and say, wow, this tastes different, when the word different means bad. But if they said, wow, this tastes different, I would say, it was something new. They didn't have the right brand of something. I just used something different. Well, I'm kind of trying to cover there so you don't know that I forgot it. Person who doesn't balance their checkbook anymore, who was so OCD about that, it's just not important in life anymore. I just don't need to. I don't need to. I've decided I don't need to. We cover a lot. Sometimes we see that in conversation. Rather than say to someone, did you watch the ball game yesterday? Now, I live in Knoxville. The ball game always means the UT football game. There is no other ball game we talk about. So someone says, did you watch the ball game? We all know what it means. And someone who says, yes, wasn't that good? Okay, that might be an acceptable answer, but I probably need to dig a little deeper and say, well, can you believe the color of those uniforms? What was that? And here I'm talking about Oregon. If you're a football fan, you know what I'm talking about. Those are the ugliest uniforms around. Oh my gosh. So, you engage them in conversation to see if they can really engage in it. Because we can cover on the surface and say, yes, I did, But engage them. Try to get someone to talk about specifics. If they're not able to talk about specifics about something, there might be a problem there. Another warning sign is trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. So this may be a lot of times where this will show is someone who falls, who has trouble judging distance, and that's happens in one of the stages of Alzheimer's, that someone has trouble judging distance, and that's why it becomes more dangerous to drive. That they fall a lot because they didn't judge how far down that step was, or that there was even a step there. Something else that happens, one of the warning signs, is confusion with time or place. Someone can get lost in a store. Someone can forget that it's mealtime. They get up at 4 a.m. and think it's time for lunchtime. And I know these sound really exaggerated, but that's what it is with Alzheimer's. So normal aging is, oh, where's the afternoon gone? I didn't realize it was 5 o'clock already. I do that now. It's okay. That's normal. But truly to be disoriented to, it's summer out there. It's probably 90 degrees today. But someone to be so convinced, no, it's wintertime because I just saw the Christmas lights. I know it's wintertime. That sounds exaggerated, but that is one of the things we're talking about. We talk about confusion with time or place. Another warning sign is that people have new problems with words in speaking or writing them. When I had my brain injury, I had a lot of trouble saying the right words. I made up a lot of words. I would point to things. I could write the words down when I could get this hand to work, but I couldn't get them out of my mouth. So I have a small understanding of what that must be like for someone. And one of the things a lot of folks with Alzheimer's will do is make up a word. So instead of a watch, it's a hand clock. Because it's on your hand and it's a clock, right? It's a hand clock. And they're truly convinced this is the right word. This is the right thing. But so difficulty with words or speaking and writing, that's one of the things you'll see. Another warning sign is misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps. 2 weeks ago, my husband lost his wallet. It was panic mode at our house, and I was pretty okay with it until he told me how much cash he had in it, and then I was a little more panic-stricken. and he is the world's worst about remembering, what he did 2 hours ago specifically. And I said, you have to think. Where were you? What did you do? Just walk through your day. And of course he was able to do that. Someone with Alzheimer's would not be able to retrace those steps, or they would come up with some gibberish, or they would get so frustrated they would just cry. And I would too. I've been in that situation. But the inability to retrace your steps is one of the warning signs. Decreased or poor judgment. I think one of the sessions this morning, as some of you were in, I heard someone talking about it. I don't know which session it was. It was probably something with TBI about fraud. That decreased or poor judgment, a lot of times someone with Alzheimer's will say, oh, well, they called and said, I need to give to so-and-so. We hear about people being taken advantage of a lot. And that is one of the warning signs. People don't have good judgment about what's appropriate for them to spend their money and resources on. Again, we're talking extremes here. Someone may say that I have poor judgment on something I spend money on at times, but we're talking about extreme cases here. Another one is withdrawal from work or social activities. And that goes back to what I was saying. If you ask someone a question and they're not sure of the answer, sometimes it's just easier to not participate in the conversation than to have the wrong answer or not have the complete answer. So someone may begin to withdraw socially. They may begin to, they can't follow the conversation. They can't follow the TV show. They can't follow the conversation in person with you. They can't follow the conversation on the telephone. So they become more isolated. They don't answer the phone. They watch TV, but they can't tell you what they watched. Oh, I don't know what's on. Go ahead and put it on whatever you want. Well, what were you watching? I don't know. They may really not. Another warning sign is changes in mood and personality. Becoming depressed, becoming anxious, having apathy, being withdrawn. Those are things that we often see with someone who has Alzheimer's. So those are warning signs. So a lot of times at this point, people have questions about, well, what is Alzheimer's? Why does all that happen to our brains? So what's happening when you have Alzheimer's is that you have an abnormal buildup of two particular proteins in your brain called beta amyloid and tau. We all have them in our bodies. We all have them in our brains. They're part of what makes us who we are. But the abnormal buildup of those, when we see that, that's when you have Alzheimer's. The biggest risk factor for getting Alzheimer's is age. If you think about it, as we age, we have those proteins. If they're building in our body, then they're going to continue to build. So if we start out here, everybody having those proteins, and as you age, you build up more of those, then that's going to put you in a higher risk category. I'm very aware of the age group in front of me, so some of these statistics are not going to be the easiest to hear. But statistically, If you've hit the age of 65, 1 in 8 people have Alzheimer's. Statistically, if you are at age 85, 1 in 3 people have Alzheimer's. Again, you have continued to build up those proteins in your brain. Now, what those proteins do to your brain, okay, beta amyloid creates plaques in your brain. So if you think about that, we're probably all familiar with plaque in our heart. Who hasn't known someone who's had bypass surgery to bypass where all that plaque is built up? Well, there's no bypass for your brain. So if plaque is building up in your brain, then you're going to have less blood flow. Less blood flow equals something dying off and shrinking. So your brain begins to shrink because there's less blood flow to it. The other protein, tau, spelled T-A-W, creates tangles, is the best way we describe it. So if you saw like your brain is here and it has like string all over it or spaghetti all over it, creating tangles, it's tangling off blood supply to your brain. And so those are the two things that are happening to your brain when you have Alzheimer's. And it's not as if it begins attacking here and continually moves down. So we can't say you cleanly go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. There are 7 classic stages, but we can't say you go from 1 to 2 to 3. You may vacillate back and forth as blood flow may come through at times. The first stage is the short-term memory that's affected. So that's why someone can't remember something from 10 minutes ago, yesterday, last week, but they can remember something vividly from 50 years ago, because that first part of your brain that's affected is the ability to make new memories. Second part that's affected is often that distance, that judgment of distance, and that's why someone with Alzheimer's who is driving is a really scary proposition out there. So when those things begin happening in your brain, it's not as if you're going to see something differently in me. It's in my head, it's in my brain. So a lot of times diagnosis is a difficult thing for many reasons. It's difficult for someone to go say something is wrong. It's perhaps difficult for family members to say something is wrong with mom, we need to take her to the doctor, because you don't see anything differently. Am I just making this up? Is this really bad? But again, we've talked about those 10 warning signs. You don't have to have all 10 for it to be there, but don't take them as I said, the normal aging things. One of the things I tell people is if you forget where your keys are, or here's a good one, someone walks into a room and forgets what they went in there for. That's okay, that happens. But if someone says, oh, you went in there to get a glass of water, and you say, no, that wasn't it, but that was it, that might be a problem. Even when someone presents you with the answer, you're pretty sure that wasn't it. That's a problem when given the cue, given the answer, you don't know it. But again, you don't see these changes happening to someone on the outside. So it's really important when you feel like someone is having some cognitive issues that you go to a doctor and ask for a cognitive exam. If the doctor feels like it needs to go further than that, they may order other tests. I remember as a child hearing that the only way to really know if someone had Alzheimer's was upon death if they did an autopsy, because then you could see that the brain had shrunk and that it had the tangles around it. We now can tell from a PET imaging scan. So if someone has a PET imaging scan, you can tell if they have Alzheimer's. You will see the brain has shrunk. The PET imaging scan is the one you've seen on TV and in movies that lights up with all the colors. And so you will see the brain has shrunk. You will see the plaques and tangles on it. That's not a standard test, so you have to go through your doctor and have a series of probably other exams first to have that done. Let me just stop. I've given you lots of information. Let me ask if there are questions. I have lots more I can talk about, but let's see what questions y'all have. There are some things that you can do to decrease your risk factors. So again, we've got some new things out, so I'm going to look down here. So if we're all at a baseline of here, and as you age, you build up those proteins more often, then there's nothing we can do about that. The things we can help, the risk factors we can help, is if you have untreated vascular illnesses. such as diabetes, high blood pressure, if you've had heart disease and probably cholesterol issues, if those are untreated, those will increase your risk factors. So the best thing you can do is to control those by diet, by medication, by lifestyle changes. Those things just in and of themselves decrease the blood flow. So you need to have those under control. So if you have any of those that are not managed, your increase is going up here, your risk factor. If you can manage those, you're coming back down to level, right? Having a traumatic brain injury increases my risk. There's nothing I can do about that now. So here I am with everybody else, I'm increased. So I need to make really sure I control things like my diet to keep diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure at a lower level. The other things we recommend is that you stay active physically and mentally. So I don't like doing crossword puzzles. I really don't at all. I'm not good at that. But that's probably something I need to try more often. I need to challenge my brain in new ways. That will keep it moving, just like with physical exercise. You do something that keeps you moving, it keeps your muscles moving. You need to challenge your brain in new ways. That can actually help reduce your risk because you're keeping blood flow into your brain, working it in new ways. Physical exercise is actually one of the only things we know of that can help change the buildup of those proteins. If we had some drug that could wipe off those proteins, then we wouldn't have a problem with Alzheimer's. Physical exercise, the endorphins that are released from that can actually stop the progression, stop the buildup of those proteins. So physical exercise is very important. That is one of the things that we can do in our life to help reduce our risks. Other things we can do to reduce our risk, we know is having a Mediterranean diet has shown to decrease the risk factors for Alzheimer's. And a Mediterranean diet includes fish, more olive oil, more vegetables, those kinds of things. We know from several studies that having a diet that's rich in vitamin E is helpful to you. Now, do not go out and go buy a bunch of supplements for vitamin E just because I just said that. You need to talk to your doctor before you do something like that. But you can include vitamin E in your diet, and that would be sunflower seeds, almonds. Are you the dietitian? You could probably tell us quicker what vitamin E includes. No, I'm sorry, there was a dietitian here earlier. Almonds, avocado, spinach, peanuts, asparagus, mustard greens. Those are the foods that are highest in vitamin E, and that can actually stop the buildup of those proteins to a degree. So that can help lower your risk. Stop smoking. That can actually help your blood flow. I mean, how many times have we heard that to stop smoking for a million reasons? But that can help increase your blood flow, which will help decrease the buildup of those proteins on your brain. So there are lots of things we can make changes with in that way. Eat nuts, beans, berries, whole grains. Look and see if there's something else. Berries particularly have proven to be effective in helping to lower your risk. Again, we're all here. If you eat those certain foods, it can start to decrease your risk. The proteins will not build up as quickly on your brain. It's going to happen as we age, but they will not build up as quickly. There are other things that play into risk factors that are out of our control. Of all the people who have Alzheimer's, 2/3 of them are women. 2 weeks ago, if I were having this discussion with you, I would have told you that the primary reason we think that is so is because women tend to live longer than men. And remember, age is the biggest risk factor. The longer you live, the more you're going to build up those proteins on your brain. It increases your risk. However, this past week, with our international conference of all the researchers coming together, we have learned that, and excuse me again, I'm looking to get this right, we've learned that Alzheimer's worsens twice as fast in women as it does men, and we think that there may be a correlation with estrogen. The lack of estrogen increases those proteins faster in your brain. So estrogen is responsible, one of its functions is to bring energy to your brain, and the lack of estrogen as women age means that those proteins are building up more quickly. We're still not sure what that means for any kind of treatment for real-life application, but that was exciting news that we got this week from our researchers, because it means that we are a little bit closer to figuring out a piece of the puzzle. One of the questions we often get are about medications for Alzheimer's. There are currently 5 medications that are FDA approved for someone with Alzheimer's to take. Those do not cure it. They do not stop it. They slow the progression, they don't slow the progression, either they manage the symptoms. So if someone has irritability, if someone has withdrawn, if they have anxiety, just any number of things that can go on with Alzheimer's, then those medications will help manage those symptoms. However, this past week, there is a medication that's been in a long-term study that does look like it can slow the progression. It's not a cure, but it means that you won't progress as quickly. That's very promising. And actually, the drug company that developed that did a study, and it showed no difference. So in 2012, they thought, okay, we'll stop this study now. And they thought, no, let's just keep going a little bit longer. They kept going, and now 3 years later, they know that those extra 3 years of using that, when they compare that with the control group, that it actually is beginning to make a difference in slowing the progression. So sometimes it takes a while for us to get answers because we have to do long-term studies about Alzheimer's. Let me stop again. We have a microphone so everybody can hear a question. Are there any more questions at this point? I usually have lots of questions about Alzheimer's. Come on. Anybody know the difference in Alzheimer's? Oh, you have a question. Oh, hit that? Yes, she's on her way with the microphone. Another question we get sometimes is about Alzheimer's and dementia. What's the difference? Dementia is like saying food. I had food for breakfast. It's very generic. There are different types of dementia. 60 to 70% of all dementia is Alzheimer's. There's also Lewy body, vascular dementia, Parkinson's dementia. There's all kinds of dementia. But the most common form is Alzheimer's. So when someone says, I have dementia, it's a type. It may be easier for them to say dementia and not face what it really is, but it's a type of dementia. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry for walking in late. I had to go down the hall and get information in the corner front of the building. And I saw on the brochure of schedule of meetings that you were going to discuss the 10 warning signs or something of Alzheimer's.
Yes, sir.
And I had to be busy, so I'm running late getting here, and I apologize for
That's fine.
Do you have a brochure that I could pick up with the 10 warning signs?
We have a few up here. I've got one that's the basics of Alzheimer's, and it goes over the warning signs. Then I've also got a bookmark that goes over the warning signs that are up here. So we do have that, but as I was saying earlier, sometimes it's just things that are very, here you can have this one. That's fine, that's fine. They're propped up here on a chair down here. But sometimes it's just something that feels very exaggerated. So misplacing your keys, that's normal, that's okay, that's fine. That's normal and okay. It's when someone says, oh, you put them in the bedroom, and you say, no, that's not it. It's when given the answers, you really can't recall. And so it's very exaggerated things. We all forget something sometimes. We forget what we walked in a room for. But if somebody says you went in there to get a glass of water and you say, no, that wasn't it, then that might be a problem. If you get disoriented to where you are, if you get lost in the grocery store, that's a problem. And as I said, a lot of times it's that we're covering for ourselves too. Do you really think if you were lost in the grocery store, honestly, would you walk up to someone and say, I'm lost? Our pride would keep us from doing that. And so if you have someone you're concerned about, you really need to watch things very carefully, because rarely will someone raise their hand and say, I'm having problems, I think I need some help. It's a very difficult thing to do. Yes, ma'am, she'll come up with the microphone. We're live streaming, I think, to Fairfield Glade. That's why we want to do the microphone so they could hear the questions as well.
Does Alzheimer's have a lot of physical things that happen in the later stages?
Yes. So, as I said, the things that are affected, your brain shrinks in size. It has less blood flow to it. And what eventually happens with Alzheimer's, because people will say, well, how does someone die from it, is that the part of your brain that controls swallowing and breathing is affected. So At the very end stages, that is how someone dies. Now, in between the beginning and the end, the part of your brain that controls everything is affected. So someone may, they'll quit speaking a lot of times. A lot of times someone will have trouble with their gait, their walk will be different, have trouble with balance. Of course, that balance is an issue even earlier on, but you will show some physical signs. It's not a cookie cutter disease though. I mean, just what I've told you, the things that we can do to decrease our risk. So if someone is here and as they age, they're increasing their risk, but they quit smoking, they have they have no vascular illness, they don't have anything to control, they have no vascular illness, then they're at a very different level than the other 75-year-old who smokes, who doesn't eat a vitamin E diet, who doesn't exercise, and so their Alzheimer's is going to look very differently. So, or could look differently, not necessarily will, but could look differently. It does begin to affect other things physically for you, but it's at a different rate and looks differently for people. It is an incredibly perplexing disease, but we know little bits and pieces more all the time. One of the only medications, until the news this week that there's a medication that may slow the progression, the only medication we knew of that actually affected the buildup of those proteins that could reverse some of those buildup of proteins is metformin. Does anybody know metformin? My husband takes metformin. It's for type 2 diabetes. And the day I went home and told him, he was like, oh, let's double up. I was like, no, we just got you straightened out. We're not doing that. But so we know there is some correlation between your glucose levels, which carry energy to the brain, glucose does, but so you have to get that balance right. There is some correlation between that and Alzheimer's. We don't have the big picture answer, but that's why we continue research. That we don't recommend you just go take metformin, though. Yes.
All right, so the question is, obviously, I know there's been a tremendous push, particularly by the White House in the last couple of years, to try to find a cure. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of money being pumped in. But people have had Alzheimer's for years. I mean, going back for, it's not a new disease.
It's not.
So what happened? Is there something that has, is it just that there's more people getting older, so we see this as a much more relevant problem?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And you're right. When I was a child, my grandmother had senility. It was probably Alzheimer's. We called it senility. We called it hardening of the arteries. There have always been people with Alzheimer's. It was identified actually over 100 years ago by a German scientist whose last name was Alzheimer. So we know that it's been around. Why is it so much more in front of us now? Remember the statistic that 1 in 8 people age 65 have Alzheimer's? There are 10,000 people a day in this country turning 65. I'm from Alabama and I can't do higher math, so I can't do that math and tell you right quickly that statistical number, but that's a lot of people at risk. And so I think it's that we become, our population is aging. In the United States right now, there are 5.2 million people who have Alzheimer's. Now when I give you that statistic, 5.2, in the state of Tennessee, there are 110,000 people with Alzheimer's. That's a number I can't wrap my head around. Now hear this one. We know from a study that was published earlier in 2015 from doctors that only 45% of their patients who have Alzheimer's have they told that to. So if I'm telling you there's 110,000 people in Tennessee with Alzheimer's and only 45% of the people who have Alzheimer's know it, there's a lot more than that. Less than half the people who have it have ever been told by their doctors. Them or their caregivers been told. When we ask doctors why, they tell us that a couple of reasons. One is there's no cure. It's a death sentence I've just handed them. And it's oftentimes a general practitioner who's giving that diagnosis or would or could give that diagnosis. I've had my general practitioner tell me, if I were an oncologist, I took entire courses on how to deliver the news that you have cancer. But as a general practitioner, I had about 4 hours about Alzheimer's. So they don't know how to deliver that news. And then they don't know what to do about it. So I tell you, you have Alzheimer's. I'm really sorry. There is no cure. it is a fatal disease at this point. Now, my next appointment's coming in, you need to go. So part of what we do at the Alzheimer's Association right now is we are advocating for legislation to be passed so that Medicare dollars will pay for a doctor to do care planning with someone. So the doctor or someone in the doctor's office will do care planning about Alzheimer's. We'll educate the doctors, and we work on that every day to give information to doctors. But the truth is, if someone's not paying for time for someone to care plan, it really may not happen. The other thing on that legislation that's tied to that is that doctors must disclose the diagnosis, and it must be in the medical chart. Imagine if your mother has Alzheimer's and lives in another city, and she has diabetes, and she ends up at the ER because she can't manage her diabetes. They give her all the instructions on what to do. They tell her what to do. They send her home. In a week, she's back because she couldn't remember it. But nowhere in her chart does it say she has Alzheimer's. They think she's non-compliant. Well, she's getting a pretty bad rap all of a sudden. So we're asking that it be mandated that it's in charts, that doctors tell it, and that Medicare pay for care planning from physicians. We'll educate the physicians. And I must tell you, in my office, we work every day to talk to physicians, physicians' assistants, office managers, nurses, everyone. And never have I had anyone say, I don't want that information. I don't mean to paint this as a broad stroke that doctors don't care. They just don't know what to do about it. And if their time is not going to be, or someone in their office's time is not going to be paid to do care planning, it's very difficult for them to manage that then. I think it's probably similar to what it was 30 or 40 years ago when we whispered about cancer. And people had cancer and didn't know it. You know, why even tell them? They're just going to die. It's going to be harder for them. And we have to get out of that. As someone who's at a higher risk for Alzheimer's, I want to know that. I'm part of a clinical trial study where they will measure my progress or lack thereof as I age because of my higher risk factor. I want to be on a list on a clinical trial, so when the first drug comes along that can make a difference, I'm at the top of that list to get it. There is value in knowing what you have and value in knowing it early. What other questions? I just got off on a rampage there about... and I want to be mindful of time because I'm what's standing between you and your lunch probably. Any more questions? No? The information up here all has our website on it. It also has our 1-800 number on it. And let me give you that number now for some of you that are taking notes. It's 800-272-3900. That number is answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single day of the year by social workers who can help answer one question, who can help you plan a doctor's visit, who can help talk to you about warning signs if you're seeing something in somebody you're concerned about. They can talk. We have folks, family members who call. We have people who work in facilities who call. It's 3 a.m. We've tried to get Miss Lucy back to bed, and she won't go back to bed. We've done everything we know how to do. Can you help us figure out what we can do? They are fantastic folks at that number, so please use them. It's a free service. They have community resource information if you're looking for resources, but also they know the disease. They are disease experts and can help you with anything. I'm happy to take any more questions, any concerns about the warning signs. I know I ran through those kind of quickly, but I do have those on handouts, but I just wanted to really go through some of what the disease is and what it looks like. No? Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.